Hey everyone, Jan here, codingwithjan.com. Building themes in 2022 and beyond. Brand hot topic, especially since the theme store reopened for new submissions. And we've already been covering quite a bit throughout the last few interviews with Liam. We've been talking about how to come up with a concept, how to compete with existing themes, earning potentials, the theme store requirements, how to pass the review process, and so on and so forth. So if you haven't seen these episodes yet, I highly recommend you check them out because there's like so much good information in there. But I also know you guys, you don't want to be sitting here all day long and just brainstorm. You want to go out there and build things, right? So that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. We will ask Liam about the specific tools we need and how to practically get started. That will make the whole series a lot more complete. So then, let's have a look. All right, Liam, it's great to have you back one more time. So how are you doing today?
I'm great, Jan. Thanks for having me here today. Always an honor and a pleasure to be chatting with you and your audience. We've actually been working internally on a lot of interesting tools and resources, so I'm sure team developers will be very excited to see what we are releasing in the next few months. But otherwise, doing good. Been using actually a lot of the tools that we'll be talking in this video today, so I have some first-hand experience and insights to share. And yeah, just excited and happy to be talking about building themes with you today.
Awesome. That sounds great. So then let's just cut the chase. Liam, what tools do I need to get started with building themes from scratch?
Sure. So the main tools that you will want when you're setting up a development environment that is suitable for building themes as opposed to customizing themes would include, firstly, a development store that is associated with your partner account. These are free to create and they act as really great sandboxes that you can use for sending information to a store or also downloading theme information or store data from. And again, totally free to create. So do feel free to create those. Secondly, you will need to be working with a text editor on your local computer. So a program like VS Code or Sublime will let you edit the theme files. So you can edit the liquid files, JavaScript files, CSS files, JSON files. You'll be able to edit all of those on your local computer with a text editor of your choice. Thirdly, you will likely want to work with the Shopify CLI, which allows you to transfer information to and from your linked development store, as well as generate a what we call a development theme, which runs locally on your computer. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that in this video. And fourthly and finally, you will likely want to work with the Shopify GitHub integration, which essentially allows you to create a version control management system when you are making changes to a theme, when you are maybe reviewing changes before they're merged into the main theme. So essentially, it just creates a connection between a Shopify store and a GitHub repo. And you can learn all about these different tools on our developer docs as well. So if you go to shopify.dev/themes/tools, you'll learn all about these tools and also more resources which are available too.
Okay, great. That's pretty straightforward. So you said development store, CLI, a local code editor, and then also the GitHub integration. But maybe for someone who's like completely new to this, to a complete beginner, would you also like to touch a bit on the advantages of a local development environment instead of using the Shopify code editor, maybe?
Sure. So there's definitely a few different advantages based on the different resources or tools that you're using, especially when you start using a text editor. You have a lot more control over the environment that you're working in. You can make visual changes. So things like changing like the color scheme of the editor to make it a little bit easier on your eyes, always welcome when you're spending a lot of time looking at code. But then you can also start implementing different extensions which are available to the text editors. So a lot of developers may use extensions like Emmet, which allows you to populate and generate code snippets very, very easily. Also being able to wrap components in specific element tags as well. So these are things that speed up the development process for developers. And also specifically with VS Code as a text editor, if you use this, you'll have access to the Liquid extension, which includes syntax highlighting, which makes it easier to work with theme files because just the Liquid objects and variables, stand out much more with, a very intuitive color scheme. Also, you're able to use theme check, which is included in the CLI, but you can also access it through VS Code. So this means when you're building out your theme, as you're writing the code, you can highlight specific issues or potential problems that you might be encountering. So it just allows you to follow best practices while you're actually in the editor before you do any testing. So it just highlights those early on, which is really cool. Another advantage away from like the text editor and more around like the local development environment is that it speeds up your development in a few different ways. One of those is that you have very fast reloading. So when you have a local theme running on your browser, you're able to make changes to the code of that theme, and you'll see those changes populate across to the browser automatically. So you don't need to wait, or you don't need to reload the page. Like you actually see those changes, live reload. It might sound like a very small advantage, but if you're making many changes, that small advantage really makes a big impact over time. And also something that might be very relevant to your audience, Jan, is if you are in areas, or if you're traveling around and internet connection is not very, very reliable all of the time. Once you have your development and local environment set up, you're actually a lot more independent and less reliant on a stable internet connection. So you can be working on a theme and it's running locally in your browser, and it's not reliant on the internet at all, unlike with ThemeKit, which that could be the case. So you're able to take your work with you. Maybe you're on a train or on a plane, and if the internet drops, it doesn't really cause any disruption to your work, which is really, really helpful, especially if you're on the move, working remotely, or living the digital nomad lifestyle. And also, I think finally, your local development environment can scale with you as you grow. So you may want to explore more advanced techniques later on. So we do see a lot of theme partners using tools like Gulp or Cypress that will automate like compilation of files, or will automate testing. And you can implement those when you want, if you want. And those are just two examples of ways of more advanced or more enhanced workflows. And there's a lot of different tools out there that developers have access to, and with this model, you are able to bring those in when you want. So you can scale up that workflow as well.
Yeah, totally agree. I think those were all great points. So just to wrap this up, we've been covering better workflow, syntax highlighting. You've touched on hot reloading, different extensions you can use with your local code editor. Then you also mentioned processes and routines that you can integrate into the workflow with the CLI. Mm-hmm. And I think you already briefly touched on that, but that could be a cool follow-up question. ThemeKit versus CLI. And specifically for building themes from scratch, would you recommend one over the other, or why would you say the CLI might be a better choice than ThemeKit? That could be interesting.
Sure. So for building a theme from scratch, the short answer would be we would definitely recommend the Shopify CLI over ThemeKit. Mm-hmm. And mostly that's because it's a much more feature-rich tool. So there's a lot more that's contained within the Shopify CLI than there is with ThemeKit. So with the Shopify CLI, you are You have the ability to audit your code, as I mentioned with theme check. You're able to have a completely local version of your Shopify theme running on your browser. There's also other sort of core features like being able to populate your store with different types of store data like products or um, orders, different things like that. But also the CLI is very actively maintained. It's very actively updated. If you're in the partner Slack, for example, we even have a channel for Shopify CLI, and whenever we have a new version released, we will make an announcement there, and you can even track the different versions to see how specific features might be enhanced. And also, if you see something missing from the CLI that you think could be very useful, there is an open GitHub repo where you can create an issue and make a feature request. So it is a tool that's ever evolving, and for that alone, I think it's very worth having as part of your developer toolkit. With ThemeKit, it's very good for the use case that it was created for, which is watching a theme directory, and whenever there's changes, pushing those changes up to a live Shopify store. And it performs that function very, very well. And if that's all you need, then do continue using ThemeKit. Like that's a totally valid use case, and perhaps you just want to work with that. But for building a theme from scratch, where you may need a much more robust workflow, we would recommend the CLI.
All right, sounds good. I think we're definitely on the same page with that. A local development environment is the way to go. But here's a catch. For someone who's just starting out, it might also be difficult to set up because, for example, if we're talking CLI, you have to have Ruby installed. And then you might be lacking certain dependencies, or you might encounter error messages that you haven't seen before. So the question would be, where can someone find help with setting all this up? Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. So to start off, we do have a full walkthrough of how to install and set up the Shopify CLI on our Shopify developers YouTube channel.
Awesome.
That goes through the whole process of configuring the tool. So we will link that in the description of this video so that you have a guide on like the initial setup. And also, there's a lot of documentation on our developer docs on shopify.dev that covers how to set up the tool as well. But also, if you're running into issues or blockers, you can connect with our partner support team through the partner dashboard under the support tab. They'll be able to guide you through setting up our developer tools. And also, since the GitHub repo it's an open repo for the Shopify CLI, you're able to open issues there. So if there's a blocker, or you've encountered a bug with the CLI, you can definitely flag that with our team there. There's also other opportunities too for getting assistance with the Shopify CLI when you're setting it up. If you're part of our partner Slack, we have a Shopify CLI channel that you're able to ask questions there. Our developer community is super collaborative. They're always very happy to help out a fellow developer. And then someday you might be able to pay it forward and help another developer out. We also have a Discord community too, which is very active. There's a building themes channel in there. So there's a lot of different avenues for help. But yes, definitely, admittedly, there are some dependencies. It does sometimes require some troubleshooting. I had to set up a new laptop a few weeks ago, and I definitely ran into the issue of managing new Ruby versions and Ruby version management as well. So even I'm on partner Slack as well. I'm definitely available if you have any issues. I've been through them all, so do feel free to connect one-on-one as well.
That's dangerous, Liam. But I guess everyone appreciates that because, yeah, that's actually a lot of support, and that's awesome.
Sure.
Okay, so We will add everything that you mentioned in the description as well. I'm sure people will find that very helpful. So yeah, then fast forward. Okay, now I have the CLI installed. Everything is up and running. But how do we even go about like creating a new theme? Like, do we have to create every file from scratch? Do we have some sort of a starting point? What's your take on that?
Sure. So there are a couple of different options there. When you're using the Shopify CLI, you can actually generate a fresh version of our flagship theme, Dawn, which you could use as the starting point. You could also, as you mentioned, start from complete scratch, and you could build each individual theme itself. Just by creating new files for each of the individual directories. So creating all of the sections manually, and that's also an option. And if you do go that route, our developer docs have a lot of information on each individual template and which objects are required for each of those. So if you're going that granular level, our docs are going to be a huge help to you there. If you are building on top of Dawn, you are intending on submitting your theme to the Shopify Theme Store, you will need to be very mindful and very aware of our requirement around uniqueness. So if you're building on top of Dawn, we do require you to ensure that you have a very unique visual identity and that the actual code of your theme does contain significant differences to Dawn itself, so that when you do launch on the theme store, that it's very much a different theme to Dawn. So definitely use it as a starting point, but your ending point should be quite far away from Dawn, and not just in terms of the code base, but in terms of the visual identity as well. But we are also working on improving all of the processes around that sort of getting started stage. So do watch this space for some announcements coming out around that, that very getting started stage where people are looking for a meaningful starting point.
Okay, that's exciting news. Looking forward to that. And yeah, just to recap, you can use Dawn as a starting point. We've also mentioned that a lot or touched on that a lot in our last episodes. Or you can create files one by one. Maybe then you could put an existing theme side by side so you don't miss anything, or the theme store requirements. Okay, so this is how you get started. And how about tips and tricks for using the CLI? Do you get any recommendations there?
For sure. So when you're using the CLI, there are a bunch of different commands which are related to themes, and then some that are more global commands that are just related to how you might be connecting to a partner account or to a development store. One that's super useful for when you're troubleshooting, if you're having any issues, particularly around authentication or logging in, is and one I run all the time is Shopify Who Am I? And this quickly just gives you information on what store and what partner organization you're logged in as. And then when you want to log in, you can run Shopify login dash and the URL of the development store that you want to log into. Or it also works with regular stores as well. So it's not just for development stores. If maybe if you have clients, you might want to use the CLI for that as well. Also, the commands that you would typically use when working with themes would be Shopify Theme Pull, which allows you to download all of the files of a theme that's on your connected store. If you have a number of different themes, it will prompt you to select which theme you want to pull from. Then that's downloaded onto your machine, and you can start editing those files. Once the theme is installed on your computer, you can run Shopify Theme Serve. And what this does is it creates that development theme that I mentioned that runs locally in your browser so that you're able to make changes, see those changes. You're also able to access the theme customizer for that development theme as well. And when you run that command, you'll actually see the URLs that you need to open to access the local version, the version with the theme customizer, theme editor, and also there's even a preview link that you can use for sharing, that people can access. If you have a other teammate, for example, you can share that preview link with them. Then Shopify Theme Push can be used. If you're familiar with Git, it's probably something that you've seen before, where you're able to push your changes up to either a live store, or you can push your changes to a GitHub repo. That's also an option, especially if you're using the GitHub integration. I mentioned Shopify Theme Check. So there's a few different ways to use Shopify Theme Check. You can run it in terminal as well, by running the command Shopify Theme Check, and it will scan your theme files. So that's a nice way of running it just manually, and you'll get a report of all of the different files that might have some highlighted potential issues with, and a short description of the issue. And then finally, a really useful command to use with the CLI is Shopify populate. And this will allow you to populate your store with some demo data. So I think you can create demo products, customers, and orders. So you can have on your development environment, you'll have some, particularly probably for theme development, the products will be the most important, but also when you're creating customer account pages, you'll want to test that out with customer accounts as well.
Okay, cool. I think this was a great list of commands. Maybe we can also add some of these in the description or link to articles related to these. And now I would like to shift the focus a bit, because we've been talking about the CLI, the local development environment, how to get started. But a bit earlier, you also mentioned Git. So why would you say is that helpful in particular?
Sure. So Git is essentially used to stay organized and keep track of code changes. And this is definitely helpful for building a theme from scratch, because you're going to be making quite a lot of changes when you're building components, and particularly if you're working in a group or a team of developers together, you're going to want to be able to keep track of what files were changed by who, and if you're both working on the same file, being able to manage those conflicts when you are, as I say, merging the changes into one final file. So essentially, it uses this system of branches to keep changes separated, and then different teammates are able to review the changes, merge them, or roll them back if needed. And yeah, when you're using Git locally, you will be pushing your changes up to a hosting service. The most popular, I think, is probably GitHub. Other ones do exist like Bitbucket, but we do recommend using GitHub because we have that native Shopify GitHub integration.
Okay, so GitHub basically helps you with staying organized, keeping track of code changes, also has amazing features for collaborating in teams. And I'm also glad you mentioned Bitbucket, because back in the agency, we actually used that because at the time it had some great project management integrations. But yeah, since now Shopify has this native GitHub integration, I'm also starting to gravitate more towards that. But yeah, how do you feel? Can GitHub really improve the process for building a theme? Is that something you would definitely recommend, or is this more optional? What's your take on that?
Sure. I used Bitbucket in the past as well in my previous job. So there's definitely advantages that different platforms have, but with GitHub specifically, for Shopify, we do have this native feature which is exposed in the admin. It's actually one of the few places, I think, on the Shopify admin where a developer tool is surfaced in such a prominent position, which is really nice. And I think it really does depend on your workflow. I think if you are working on your own, maybe GitHub is potentially less important. But I think when you are working with a group, it becomes almost impossible not to have, even just for the ability to avoid those conflicts where code could be overwritten, and just being able to collaborate in a very robust way. And the way that the Shopify GitHub integration works is that you can select a specific branch on a GitHub repo, and your admin will sync with that branch, assuming, of course, that the branch has all of the directories required for a Shopify theme. If it doesn't, the setup won't work correctly. So once you have all of the required files, you're able to synchronize the store admin with that branch. And what will happen then is if there's any changes made to that branch, those changes are automatically transferred across to Shopify. So you can use that as your main branch, and you can work on separate branches together and then merge into that main connected branch. Additionally, any changes made on the Shopify admin side can be transferred across to the GitHub repo too. So, which might be more applicable when a theme is finished and maybe you're working with a client instead, and you want to pull down those changes. There's a few other advantages which might be relevant for people building a theme from scratch too, like being able to have access to Shopify's Lighthouse CI GitHub action. And what this is it essentially runs some performance audits on your theme files every time you push to a specific branch.
That's
And
awesome.
the tests will use Google Lighthouse measurements to test the performance of your theme, so you can very easily track what impact the changes that you're making have on performance. And that's just one GitHub action that's available. And similarly with the CLI, you can expand on your development workflow with the GitHub integration by using different GitHub actions, using different continuous integration processes, and again, scale your workflow with the requirements that you might have.
Okay, yeah, makes a lot of sense. So GitHub is definitely an integral part of the development process, even if it just was for documenting your changes, plus all the features that you get on top, basically. All right, so I think this was awesome. And it also makes our whole series a lot more complete, because now we've touched on how to come up with a concept or your initial ideas, to how to get started, how to use the CLI. We've heard some commands today. And I think now we should just keep an eye on the comment section to see what people want to hear more about. And we've also been talking about a main call to action. So maybe you want to say a few words about that. It has to do with the partnership team. Yeah. So what do we want to what do we want people to do?
Sure. So there's a really great resource page on shopify.dev/themes-developers, which also highlights a lot of the different tools that we talked about in this video and previous videos. And also demonstrates some of the best practices that you can start integrating into your theme builds, but also gives you an opportunity to also connect with our theme partnerships team. If you want to schedule a one-to-one conversation, there is a sign-up form where you're able to send some information to us, and we'll be able to connect with you to also talk to you about your next steps for being part of the Shopify Theme Store community.
Fantastic. And yeah, I also love how you guys try to support the developer community. Like, there's so many ways to get in touch with you, even at Shopify. I think that's unseen in the space, to be honest. So yeah, that's great. And then I would say, Liam, thanks so much for taking the time today again. And yeah, always welcome back on the show.
Thanks, Jan. It's always an absolute honor to be on your channel. So thanks again for having me.